All right, guys, back for more. And if you're not back for more and you're new here, click the link up here to see the first in this series where I go in a little bit more detail what these reviews are all about. But if you're lazy and don't feel like clicking that, here's the Cliff Notes. Basically, I'm gonna go through one of my all-time favorite bodybuilders' workouts, his shoulder and tricep workout. He's one of my all-time favorites, not just for his crazy physique. Honestly, I can't relate to that at all, so it was never like, oh, I hope one day to have a physique like him. I knew that wasn't in the cards. But every time I heard him speak and kind of go through the fact that he actually had this thought process where he actually, from every single thing, from nutrition, from training, he didn't just say, hey, I got to do all the same stuff that everybody else is doing in the late 80s. He had a little bit more of, okay, let's try and figure out some stuff, figure out some different methods, figure out what works best for my body. But then he also did the great part, which, again, as far as meatheads go, really validates it, is he worked really hard. So he had the prerequisites that you need to have to be a successful bodybuilder, where he lived that, like, more so than even some of the other bodybuilders at that time, like that monk lifestyle. Like, his entire day, his entire life revolved around full-time bodybuilding, just crazy adherence, crazy work ethic. And again, the results speak for themselves. So I'm reviewing his workouts. One, first and foremost, to acknowledge that they worked for him. Look at his physique. They worked. Look at his shoulders and triceps. Good to go. And then looking at all the stuff that he did well, so we can help your guys' training as well too. Because again, I think that's some things that get lost this day and age, is everything's very abstract. We like to nerd out on things and say, oh, what makes sense mechanically, what makes sense from a physiological standpoint, what makes sense from a peer-reviewed standpoint, and all that's great guidelines. But at the end of the day, you know, if it's not actually producing results for you or for others, it doesn't matter how great it sounds on paper. So we're gonna look at some stuff that he did great and see how we can help you guys use some of that stuff as well too. And then I always say, like, I'm a coach, so I don't ever look at things, even as Dorian, because some people I think make the mistake of they look at Dorian and say, this is exactly how you do it. This is like the hardcore example of, you know, you have to do this type of workouts, you have to do this type of volume, you have to do this even frequency, you have to do this type of split. I say you're missing the lesson of Dorian, where again, he said he figured out what worked well for him. So for you to point at Dorian and say, I'm not gonna think, I'm just gonna copy that, is actually ignoring what Dorian said. So anyway, being a coach, you know, I'm also gonna go through, are there some different options for you as an individual? You're not Dorian. So you might have something that works a little bit different for your structure. You might have some different equipment options than he had in that, you know, awesome temple gym that he trained at. So we're gonna go through some different options there as well too. I'm gonna draw, so if you guys are new here, I like to draw on everything that we're doing here. So I'm gonna go through some video and actually look at, okay, where are some lines of force, you know, where are his joints, what's the alignment, all that kind of stuff, where hopefully I always say, like, physics don't lie. So I could draw some stuff wrong and make some mistakes, hopefully not, but we can actually look at, okay, with his exercise selection, not just getting hyper fixated on the exercise, but looking more so at, okay, well, what was the problem that was trying to be solved with this tool? And I've got a good quote from Dorian coming on that next. And like I said here, the main goal of these is I'm always gonna do workout reviews where there's the majority of what we're looking at is positive and beneficial, and we're trying to take or gain from it. It isn't necessarily for me to find the dumbest workouts I can find on the internet and just pick it apart, shooting fish in a barrel. That's very entertaining, but that's not my deal. I'm trying to bring something a little bit different because everybody's doing workout reviews right now. I'm just copying everybody, but with my own little spin. So on to a Dorian quote. I'm gonna kind of go through it, but you can pause here, read it a little bit longer. But I think this is great because everyone talks about Dorian, you gotta lift heavy and hard and do all this hardcore stuff. And the first sentence of this quote here is he thinks the most common misconception is that you've got to use a ton of weight. And so then he basically goes on to say, this is my favorite part of it, is you're going to be using the weights as a tool. So again, there's no way around it. If you want to have a physique like Dorian, it doesn't matter how good your form or your execution is, you will never be that large without being what would look from the outside just objectively ridiculously strong. But if you detach yourself from, I have to be ridiculously strong, that's what your fixation is, then that's when people get caught in cheating, changing their form, changing their range of motion, using momentum because they're fixated on, I have to get this number higher, as opposed to, I'm using this exercise as a tool. And basically it's that number that you're actually tracking. Mostly it's just going to be validation of, did I train hard enough the previous workout to create stimulus? And is in my recovery in place that I'm now able to beat that performance the next workout? So it's not always necessarily like, I'm just going to come in and try and beat that goal. Those numbers of, if you're able to progress, are a gut check for, did you train hard enough last time, intelligent enough, good enough exercise selection as well too, and did you do all the proper things that you need for recovery? So I just think that's great because, again, someone who's objectively speaking, looking at some of his lifts, one of the strongest bodybuilders of all time, especially considering some of the stuff that he was doing at that time. Now we get kind of that like 4-minute mile effect. As soon as somebody breaks that 4-minute mile, then all of a sudden a whole lot of other people do. But some of the weights that Dorian was using back when these videos were done in the early 90s, like people weren't doing that weight. And now again, some of these weights are a little bit more commonplace, but at the time, in my opinion, it's even more impressive, especially considering too, that he got arguably even too big. He's one of those guys where you'd say like him, like Ronnie, even looking at someone like Phil, where there's, again, from a judge's standpoint, from a fan standpoint, he actually didn't need to be as big as he was at the end. And so again, that's a little bit of a matter of opinion. So I say all that word because he didn't even have to lift any more weight than he was, obviously, to get that dominant to win several Mr. Olympias. So on to the training. In case you missed it, on his back day, he does rear delts. So people always ask, like, when should you put stuff like that? Should I put rear delts on delt day? Should I put them on back day? Should I put them on whatever day? Personal preference, honestly. So some people, they feel like if they're done after back, they're so fatigued that they're not getting enough stimulus. Some people prefer having them on shoulder days. At the end of the day, I could make arguments both ways, but this is one of those things where don't let somebody tell you what to do. Try it both ways, and just over a period of time, see what's producing better results. Short term, are you able to keep form really proper, a good form on those movements, and progress your logbook? And then long term, do you have good looking rear delts? So again, people that say like, hey, should I do this or should I do that? And they'll say something like that for rear delts, and I'll say, well, what are you currently doing? And they'll tell me what they're currently doing. I say, do your rear delts look good? Are they on pace with your physique? Do you wish they're bigger? Like, oh no, they look good. The answer is then why would you change it, right? So a lot of people will read things or see posts even from me and be like, oh, well, he said I should do this. That doesn't mean that might be a good guideline or a good place to start. But if what you're doing is actually already producing results, that's your answer. You don't need someone else to tell you. So as far as sequence and stuff, we'll discuss that a little bit here. Overall, if you have what I consider like a balanced delt, which again is kind of just a matter of opinion, but if you have a nice round looking delt, I have a hard time arguing against starting with an overhead press motion. So if you're, again, balanced overhead press, if you've been doing this for a little while, like I did personally, and I've seen this with a lot of athletes that get outside of the first few years of training, you don't have to do that. You won't know until you have some muscle if you have to start with that sequence. But I've known a lot of people, myself included, that started and did so much overhead press for the first, I probably did overhead press for the first at least 5, 6, 7, 8 years of training. And after a certain point in time, really looking at my delts, the front delt was just huge and I didn't have any of that roundness. So if you kind of get to the point where you've been training for a long period of time, maybe you've always deprioritized raises, always started with presses, maybe do a push pull lower, then that might be a case where eventually maybe you actually start with your raises first, where you want to prioritize rear delts or prioritize side delts. So the sequence here is very individual dependent. But if you have pretty balanced delts, I think this is a great sequence to start with. Start with the overhead press. And as far as things here, good lessons that we'll learn from Dorian. So I'll see if I can go back here just a little bit. One is just pick the overhead press that's the most comfortable. I think people get hyper fixated on you have to do whatever. You have to do a barbell. You have to do a dumbbell. What I'm looking at is this type of stuff. I'll see if I get an angle from the front. There we go. So this is what I'm looking at. I'm kind of looking at his upper arm position in this shoulder angle. And we'll get another view, I think, from the side. But you want something basically that takes your shoulder through a pretty good range of motion. So if I look at something where I'm just saying, okay, you're going to do a press, and people do this thing where they stop right at 90 degrees. I don't know where somebody made up that rule. They said something magical about stopping at 90. That's a position of high joint torque where, again, that moment arm type of thing, it is far from your joint, but it stays consistently far kind of all through these ranges. And again, I would say, based off what we know anecdotally and what science is kind of catching up with, I think biasing towards that lengthened to mid-range is very important. So if you're going to do a front delt, predominantly front delt motion, you want to do something that takes you through the lengthened and mid-range. So it really means dropping down here a bit. And so if you see the way that he's pressing here, especially because it's a barbell, he can't get all the way back at his side. You're going to have it a little bit more in front of you. And I'm a big fan of that, if that's the right word, because it also lets your upper arm tuck a lot closer in at your side and pick up more range of motion. So if you stop here, and maybe you're doing dumbbell or dumbbell shoulder press and you're one of the people that stops here, you're probably missing 30 degrees range of motion you could get tucking it closer at your side. So something that allows for you to get that upper arm down pretty low, get some length at that front delt and train that position, and then just something that you can load in is stable. So you're always going to be better off with some sort of back support. So again, there's this kind of old school mentality that a standing barbell press is somehow better or more functional. It's not even more functional. Yell at me in the comment section, sport people. But having some sort of back pad will always, and seated, will always allow you to use more weight pressing than if you were just doing some form of standing overhead press. So again, if you're a bodybuilder or training for physique purposes, I can't see a reason not to do something seated as well too. And then I wouldn't say that the stability of the Smith is definitively better than a barbell. There's a little bit of a skill component there as well too. So some people will say that a machine is always better than like a barbell because of the stability. But again, stability and how well someone executes a motion and how much energy they expend keeping that stable and in place is a skill as well too. So if you're very, very skilled, someone might be able to do almost the exact same weight on a barbell that they could on a Smith because they're so coordinated and they have such minimal expenditure actually keeping things in track. But if you're looking for a default, Smith is great. Any type of machine is great. So if you guys are pressing at home, check the boxes here. Some sort of overhead press that tucks very low at the side. And let's see if we can find a view from the back here as well too. I think when we were warming up, we had a good one from the back as well. Yeah, similar thing. You can see that he's dropping that elbow down nice as far. That's the biggest thing that I wanted to demonstrate there, is how low he's dropping that elbow. And then we'll watch a working set, because why not? Oh, we got a good view from the front here. Let's see if we can hear some form advice here from Leroy as well while we're going at it. Grunting, good. On your way, come on.
Nice and smooth. Right? Yeah.
In case you forget which direction to go, drive it where? Drive it up. Am I pulling it down or am I driving it up? Great spotting from there. I joke. That's my favorite person I would have yelling at me. So obviously we'll watch a couple of the working sets here as well too. I won't always put the sound on just to listen to Leroy yelling the best stuff. But I wanted you guys to see the control there as well too. So from his warm-up sets to his working set, basically nothing changes. So nice controlled pace. I don't really think prescribing a pace is important. I think you always want control to the point that you're not dropping the eccentrics, and you do want to be aggressive with your contractions, concentrics on the way up, but not to the point where you're ever swinging things. So next he moves on to lateral raises. So we'll get a little view. I think this is still a warm-up set. But one of the things I love about this, which not a lot of people even these days do because they don't like it, is Dorian is seated. So I didn't ask Dorian. He didn't. I'll DM him. I'll see if he answers me. But I'm assuming he's seated because he realizes is that the more stuff that moves. So if you walk through gyms all across the US, how do people do lateral raises? They involve their hips drastically. They involve their knees. I even see people coming up on their toes. So again, they're using as much stuff as possible to get that weight moving, as opposed to having, the whole goal in my opinion should be to have your delt doing all of the work. So considering the amount of weight that he's doing with lateral raises here, it's pretty amazing form. He's got a little back and forward motion, but in my opinion, there is a balance there. So again, this is where the nerds will get hyper fixated and stick with their 12.5-pound dumbbells on lateral raises forever, because they trying to eliminate the body moving back and forth. I mean, his body's probably moving back and forth like 3 inches, which considering the load is not mechanically changing a whole lot. The other thing I want to note here is watch how Leroy's spotting. So what is the maybe only downside of this motion, and the thing that I would change here is he's spotting him through the top. And what is he doing? He's extending the set with partials. So my only issue with the dumbbell lateral raise, if you guys are following me for a while, and again, anecdotally, this is just something that didn't exist a whole lot back then in my opinion. People, just because dumbbells have been in gyms for the longest time, it's a very convenient thing to train your delts with. But I still think that biasing towards the mid and lengthened range is the most important, where this just makes it, let's go back to the top. Let's see if we can back up a little bit. We'll do a warm-up set just to show. So here, there we go, got it at the top. So we've got the line of force from the dumbbell to this. This is that moment arm thing. So it's very long moment arm at the top, so really high joint torque at the bottom. And then if we go here and we do line of force from the dumbbell and we do the shoulder joint, that's the moment arm. Very, very low joint torque at the bottom. So that's the only issue with dumbbell lateral raises, is very, very challenged in that more shortened position. Again, where you arguably don't have the most opportunity or the most stimulus for growth, and there's not much challenge in that lengthened position. So you're gonna see where he goes next year. If it were me and you're gonna do 2 lateral raise variations, I would prioritize overloading more in that mid to lengthen range, although in the reality is, if you could even argue the sequence there a little bit, or the idea would be maybe just one motion that overloads kind of through it, and that could be a little bit more of an efficient sequence. But if you're gonna do dumbbell lateral raises, some pretty spot on form. Go seated as opposed to standing. If nothing else, it'll just keep the motion more strict. More strict means more tax on the delts, less other stuff going. And again, if you watch back through how his training partner spotted him, he was always spotting him towards the top. So he had plenty of strength to get through here. And then the last few reps, again, if you want to call forced reps, it's not really a forced rep. It's just fixing the exercise profile, which I'll continually talk about on this type of stuff. So he has so much strength here, he's basically getting more reps so that he's not under training this position. And he's basically making it lighter so that he can finish through here. So it's kind of the same as a drop set, except it's range of motion specific. So something you really can't reproduce without a good spotter. And then he just kind of continues. So if you're training to failure, depending on the exercise's profile, where you hit failure, if you're calling it task failure, is arbitrary. It just depends on the loading pattern of the exercise. So his delts did not hit failure in this length down here. So he just did a few more partials there where he had some more strength left. But then where does he go after that? God forbid Dorian is using a cable. Oh, his training partner is using a cable first. Doesn't he know that cables aren't hardcore? So he moves next to a cable. Now again, I find it funny, this is the whole delt workout. So this is the end of delts. We do some trap work after this. So he's got 3 motions. So he does an overhead press. In my opinion, between what you're doing for chest and then again doing an overhead press, that should be more than enough stimulus for front delts, which seems like Dorian also agreed. But he does 2 motions for side delts. And again, what you would consider the side delt is definitively smaller than the front delt. Why do you think he does 2 motions? Again, speculating, but what do we get different than this one? Let's see if we can do some stuff. I think we get a better, oh yeah, we get a better angle here. So when he's at the bottom here, bottom-ish, brings it across his body. If we do the line of force here, so line of force is that way, and we do a shoulder joint here, what do we have now? So in that mid to lengthen range, we have a significantly large moment arm, which just means in this bottom and lengthen position, he has a ton of joint torque now. So again, I don't know if Dorian just did this by feel or if he really had some idea of loading specific range of motion, but I would argue that's the reason he did 2 different motions that are, again, if you're looking what the upper arm is doing in the upper arm path, and again, where that plane of motion is, you know, and where the delta is opposing the load, there's not really a whole lot of difference. The only difference between these two is this one loads the bottom, and then as he comes to the top, let's see what we get there, if I can draw. Oh, he's going to the side now. Let me see if I can, there we go. Ooh. All right, hold on, I'll get it, guys. There we go. So just remember this length here, I'm actually gonna leave them both on there. So again, here is that line of force going this way. Here is about, we'll call the shoulder joint, which obviously moves. So there's that moment arm. So you guys can see this one is this length and the other one was this length. So at the top, there's maybe a third of the amount of joint torque that there was at the bottom. So if I was gonna pick and I was gonna do shoulder work, I would say this is probably just more efficient overall, doing some sort of cable variation, or obviously you could do a machine lateral variation, just for the reason that it overloads the bottom and the mid-range. This probably has the most joint torque, not here, but probably right here. So a lot of load in the lengthen, the most in the mid-range, where again, I could probably argue is where you can produce the most intramuscular force, and then drops off a little bit or has less at the top where you're definitively weakest. So this is just one very efficient exercise that, again, the torque prioritizes where you have the most opportunity to grow, but still trains the top a little bit as well. So if I was going to nitpick here for you guys at home, I don't think you have to do 2 lateral raise motions. I think you'd be better off doing 1 at a time. And now I know that, again, this is blasphemy. So this was, I don't know how Dorian gets away with doing this exercise, and the hardcore people don't pick on him because it's cables. But if you've seen me do some exercises before, imagine Dorian is laying down on a bench. He's got a cable pointing this way, and we did what? Oh my gosh, 2 at the same time. I don't know if it makes it less hardcore or something. Like, this is okay, but it would be less hardcore if he was doing both at the same time. So again, if you guys have seen, I like doing both at the same time. I like doing them lying on a bench. And what's the purpose on lying on a bench as opposed to 1 at a time? You actually have less to stabilize. So he's got luckily he weighs like 300 pounds, so him doing this isn't a whole lot to balance side to side. But for the TikTok nerds that weigh $140, this can be, you know, you're literally kind of balancing this type of thing where if you have both going at the same time, they essentially brace against each other. And if you're laying back on a bench or you have, you know, your body on a bench anywhere, it's just going to keep you more strict and more still. So again, great motion here. If you guys were doing something at home, just from an efficiency standpoint, I would say that you could just do both at the same time. Although there's nothing wrong with doing them like Dorian's doing here, you know, single arm at the same time as well too. Because I do understand, again, from a time standpoint, people always see when they do those, I don't want to move a bench, which is a valid argument. So just do them 1 at a time. You just need 1 cable. Obviously take up less space in a commercial gym. But if I was going to nitpick here for efficiency, you know, if maybe, so again, Dorian did what? He did 2 working sets, 1 with the dumbbells, 1 with a cable. If it were me, I'd say I'd rather just do 2 working sets with the cable. Same for you guys at home. If you would normally do 2 or 3 with dumbbells, 2 or 3 with cables, maybe do 4, 5, 6 with the cables. But again, it's not bad to do the other way around. I would just make a slight argument for efficiency here. So what do we have next? We're going through, he does some sets. And then what do we go through here? We go through some shrugs. So what do I want to pause on here for the shrugs? Well, let's just watch it before I speed through. So we'll watch a warm-up set, and then we'll get to a working set. So the thing you guys will probably notice here is a pretty significant elbow bend as he shrugs. And I actually like that. So if you can do it where you keep everything pretty fixed, I think that'll probably allow your shoulder blades to get in a little bit better position for a little bit more range of motion. Now, what's the only downside of that? If downside is the right word, you know, there is going to be a little bit of elbow tax or a little bit of rear delt tax. It's going to be so minimal that it doesn't really matter, but we look from the side. You know, can I get from the side when he's at the top? Oh, there we go. There we go. So again, this is a line of force going straight down this way. So if we look through here, there's a little moment arm to the elbow. There's a little moment arm to the GH joint. So that means if you're bending your elbow, you're going to have some tax at the elbow flexors and some tax of the delt complex. So probably a little bit of maybe a rear delt involved there as well too. Is that a big deal? Probably not, but it is a little something other than traps. So what's the point of bending this? If you keep your arms fixed at your side, especially Dorian size, you're going to limit probably your range of motion, where if you're out here, it's a lot more comfortable motion. If you guys just do that at home, you'll see that you'll probably let those shoulder blades move a little bit more reasonably, because sometimes, even though the traps don't attach to the upper arm, they only attach to your scapula, fixing your upper arm can limit your scap's ability to move well. So what would be the solution here? You could do dumbbells like Dorian, which is just fine. We'll watch him finish the set and get my lines off there. And again, what are we training here? Visibly just kind of what I'm going to call upper traps. My super nerds might get a little bit grumpy about that one, but basically just the part of your traps that you can see more from the front. But when you went around from the back there as well too, you can see it's kind of some of those, there's a little bit of a retraction component there as well too. So again, maybe if you're doing that at home and you don't want some elbow stuff, or if you have some elbow wishes, or you just want to keep it a little bit more strict, you go with something a little bit wider, like a trap bar, I think would be one of the best options. Or you could even do, like cables could be a very good option as well too. And again, do you have to put traps with shoulders? That's the other question as well that people ask too. Personal preference. I mean, I can make a strong argument to put them with back because of how much your entire trap complex is working when you're retracting your shoulder blades, particularly doing rowing stuff. But again, it's really one of those things that's personal preference. For as much of the nerd arguments as we can make one way or the other, if you prefer having it with shoulders, put them with shoulders. You prefer it with back, put them with back. I don't think there's enough evidence one way or the other that there's a definitively better way to go about it. Next, we're moving on to triceps. Again, I think it's funny that Dorian is starting with press downs, which again, a lot of the hardcore people will say is a no-no. But again, a lot of the people like to do this just to help kind of warm up the elbows or whatever we've got going on. The only thing that I'll say about this is when you're Dorian size, look how much his upper arm is moving. So you can see, looking at his upper arm, that it's almost more of a press. Now, the funny thing is, if you're trying to keep it elbow friendly and you're gonna do a fixed close grip, you pretty much have to turn it into a press. Otherwise, it's actually gonna be really rough on the elbows. So it's almost a little bit more of, for lack of a better word, a little bit of a compound motion, more so than it is just a pure isolated extension. You can't tell as much from the side, but you can certainly see it more from the front. Again, a little bit of like this type of motion. So again, I'm not opposed to any of that. Again, it's arguably for huge guys, maybe just not as efficient. And you'll see what he does for some other movements moving forward. The only thing I would say here is if you're bigger, you might just be better off going straight to something single arm or something that allows for a little bit more comfortable range of motion. So again, I know the thing that people will say here is, oh, with the fixed bar, I can handle a little bit more weight than if I did a rope. But the reality is it's, again, just a matter of trade-off for, elbow comfort here as well too. So again, the only nitpick here is a little bit of extra stuff going on, maybe not lining up quite as well with the elbows. So for you guys at home, kind of go a little bit of comfort on this one. And I think, I know that obviously Dorian had some elbow issues from, bicep issues, bicep tendon, tricep tendon issues. The thing with those is you could look at the motion he was doing at the time of injury, but very often it's stuff that built up much prior to that, longer, sometimes over years, that actually helped contribute to it as opposed to just the acute thing. Again, that's purely speculation, I don't know. But if I was programming here, that's why most of the time you won't see me put a close bar for almost anyone. I'd rather do some sort of single arm type thing, and especially if you're larger, or some sort of rope there to start. If your elbow is allowed, I would actually rather you start with a motion like this. Whereas again, it's a little bit more, the reason I prefer this, let me see if I can get a good angle here. This is mainly what I wanted to show on the warm up, and you'll see the same on his working sets, is this is beautiful right here. So, some people like to go behind the head because he's keeping a little bit of tension at the top. So if you go right over here and that weight stacks straight over your face, it's going to be no tension at the top, which I actually don't think is a big deal at all. Him keeping a little bit further back, and when he doesn't run into his forehead and brings it here, he allows himself some more elbow flexion. So for how big Dorian's arms are, this is pretty much near full elbow flexion. I don't think his tissue allows. Maybe he could have smushed that in another inch, but obviously if you look how far my small arms go, and this is where they stop, and look how big his arms are, I think that's probably literally the end for him. So it's, again, you would call this a skull crush variation, but he's getting it all the way to near full elbow flexion, which is awesome. A lot of people don't do that. When they're doing skull crushers, they go to the chin, they go to the forehead or whatever, which isn't inherently bad. But again, if you're looking at that angle, you're not having nearly as much range of motion as you would bringing it back where he is from there. Again, the only nitpicky thing I have on these is you can see how much his elbows are flared. We'll just watch his working set as we go. I would just say this is going to be a little tough on the elbows. So again, this is still something where you get from the hardcore crowd some kickback. What would be the other option here? Him going one arm at a time might allow him to be a little bit more comfortable on the elbows, because this is the problem when we get right, if there is a problem. I mean, we're looking from the side. The line of force, if we're looking, is going basically this way. His arm is flared out that much that way. Again, if we're looking at this hinge joint, which his elbow is kind of angled like that, you generally want force going right through that hinge joint at about a 90-degree angle. So if his elbow is here, the force is essentially going through that. And that would be something that I would argue, again, this is not something you can really prove. You can't really do a study of saying, hey, what's the long-term effects of this, potentially over 5-10 years, especially with 8 million other variables. There'll never be a practical study that shows that. This is just based on personal experience. This can tend to be a little rough on elbows, and you do get the inside-outside elbow type thing with this. And again, anyone that's actually skull crushed, I skull crushed, so people think I like doing cable stuff. I hate doing cable stuff. It's annoying, it's boring. I'd much rather do a skull crush. I did skull crush for 10 years. And it was after 10 years that I started to accumulate issues and had the same thing with some of my clientele. So if I was going to nitpick here, this is the reason for cables. And the only good news that we have now is we have a lot of ginormous dudes that do cables now. Obviously, if you look at people like Hunter Labrada, you'll never see him do this. And he has some of the biggest triceps on stage right now. When I used to train Dallas McCarver, he personally said when I was showing him cable crossover variations, anytime we did that, he thought that was more responsible for tricep growth than any other exercise. He said that himself. And, nerds, meatheads on the internet were actually arguing with him and trying to tell him that that's not the case, like telling him what grew his triceps more than anything else. So I think you can reproduce all the exact same positions. Like if I was huge and this is my position for a skull crush, I'd rather just do a cable variation like that, because you can have the exact same joint positions, the exact same loading pattern, but just something that lines up with the joint better. So if he had a cable, you could do these seated, you could do them whatever, the cable pulling this way and going right through his elbow joint there. Things are gonna line up a little bit prettier. And again, as far as your triceps are concerned, it's the same joint angle and it's pretty much the same loading pattern. This is a great loading pattern here too, because there's challenge at the bottom, there's the most challenge in the mid-range where I think you can grow the most. And again, cables are just gonna give you a little bit more joint friendly. As far as everything else, he's lying back on a bench, like it's great exercise. It's braced, you're not gonna have any limited load. It's putting it all where you want it in a fairly isolated motion. I would just, again, a little nitpicky with the something a little bit more joint friendly. And then what does he finish with? He finishes with this reverse grip extension, which I find funny because again, a lot of hardcore people would say this is a complete waste of time, and maybe they skip this end of blood and guts going to something here. The thing I love about this motion is, one, it's a great profile. So if we go to the top here, let's see if I can get top-ish. So top, there we go. So one, he's still getting a lot of range of motion. And if we're doing the line of force here, and we do it to the elbow joint, sorry. So there's the line of force at the lengthened position, pretty significant moment arm, which means pretty significant joint torque. And again, where do we want to really load? We want to load through the lengthen in the mid. So we go to the mid range, stopped it at a nice spot there. Where's that moment arm? Right around there. So it's the heaviest in the mid range, still significantly heavy in the lengthen range. And then when it comes to the arguably the least important range of motion, where do we have that line of force? Here. Where is the elbow joint? Right here. So if you compare these, that's probably about the smallest, so the least joint torque, where you arguably have the least opportunity to grow, the most in that mid, and then still pretty significant in the lengthen range. But also, what's the beauty of this underhand? So the issue with underhand is the underhand itself changes absolutely nothing from a tricep standpoint. So your tricep attaches to your ulnar, it doesn't attach to the radius. When you rotate this is just radius moving over the ulnar. So the ulnar doesn't move at all, which means this underhand, so from this overhand to this neutral to this underhand, nothing changes from a tricep position at all. The tricep stays exactly the same. It doesn't move. It doesn't change length. It does nothing. So what is the difference of this? Well, for most big guys like Dorian, what happened when he did an overhand grip? We saw it in the beginning with the easy bar or whatever the straight bar he has. Overhand grip when you're big makes this upper arm have to go out just as a result of semantics, having to hold on to this bar. So I don't know for sure, but I bet this just felt really damn good on Dorian's elbows because that kept that cable right in line with his elbow joint. Again, we can't look at this right from the front or from behind, but you can tell from here, if I looked, it's that line of force is passing straight through his elbow joint. So of all of his motions, this is the one that I would consider the most joint healthy. And again, and also the one that, again, that's probably the reason he's taking this hand position, because if he had to go over, he'd basically be doing almost the exact same motion he did in the beginning with the fixed bar. So if I could critique his tricep workout at all or his tricep movements at all, you know, I think he might have done better overall from an elbow health standpoint, doing a little bit more of some single arm options, maybe having a rope instead of that fixed bar to start. But again, that's being really nitpicky. Again, from having a good complete tricep workout, you know, I don't think he would really even need 3 exercises, you know, because again, what's his upper arm position using a cable? The loading pattern is very similar with the first. I would probably dump the first, go with this one instead, maybe even have his skull crusher first, but with something, again, that's a little bit more elbow friendly. But overall, you know, this is a great movement for him, and I would say that's probably why he's having the underhand. What do I like as opposed to doing underhand? I'd rather have a neutral grip. So if you have a rope or you put your hand in a cuff, you can load even heavier, because lots of times the limiting factor here is the grip, you know, or even like the wrist extensors, where if you're more neutral, you'll generally be able to use more load and still have that comfortable upper arm position. So that's the workout. I think he poses a little bit at the end of this, because what meathead, there we go. What meathead trains shoulders and trains triceps, and then at the end doesn't look in the mirror just a little bit. And also notice Leroy's spotting, always spot on, always keeping the reps, the first or the last reps looking like the first reps. There we go. Who doesn't do that? Getting a live ball, checking out the pump. There it is, solid pump. He says something funny there, I don't understand. But anyway, so that is that. So a little quick review through a shoulder and tricep sequence. Again, as you guys can see, overall, I think the structure is very, very good. You know, and if there was something I was nitpicking just a little bit, it's just some of the exercise selection, considering a little bit more joint health. The shoulder is pretty much spot on. So the only thing there is, you know, would I rather have 1 motion instead of 2 lateral raises? Even then, what difference would that make from actual visual? I don't know. It'd be really tough to say that even my more efficient argument would actually produce a different physical result. So that's just kind of more so like a discussion point than does it really matter. Go with preference on that. If you prefer doing more sets with something that loads the bottom and is lighter at the top, fine. But if you like doing both, something that loads the bottom and something that overloads the top, then do 2 like Dorian did. And then as far as tricep goes, my only consideration there is some stuff maybe a little bit more elbow friendly, even though you see that Dorian was kind of doing some of that stuff on his own with that underhand grip. So as always, hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you haven't watched through the rest of the series, I've done every single one in his split, minus maybe legs coming after this, but I'll get to all of them. And if you have stuff that you guys want to see more of, get down in the comment section, let me know. And as always, looking to support the channel, get down in the description and check out my app if you want some well-structured workouts, programs, nutritional guidance, asking me questions personally, one-on-one in the forums. Get down in there. As always, appreciate you guys.